This past week, I turned down a $1,200 freelance gig. Not because the work wasn't great and not because the people weren't great. On the contrary, the work was awesome. It was super creatively rewarding. I love the people, love working with them. But because I realized that this was still living in the mindset of chasing short-term wins rather than my long-term goals, I realized I had to say no to this. The turning point for me was I was out for a walk with my wife one evening, and I was presenting to her this opportunity that had just come up and the things that I was excited about in it. And she asked me a question. She said, will this help you build the life that you say that you want? Or is this just kind of filling up space and just filling up your time again? And that question caught me and gave me pause to think. And it came from a good place with my wife. Earlier last week, I'd mentioned to my wife how I wanted to have the time and the freedom to be able to pick up and go help friends or family if they called and they needed help, and not be stuck to the grind and stuck behind my desk working all the time to try to make ends meet. And so her question came from that place is like, does this opportunity help you get there? Or does it just kind of fill up your time and keep you busy, keep you on the treadmill of busy work? And so as I paused and pondered that, I realized I had to say no to this gig, even though it was super exciting and it was something that creatively I was excited to do. But I knew I needed to say no, because if I'm serious about turning this podcast into a business, then I can't just keep filling my calendar with things that don't move the mission of the podcast and this business forward. So if you can relate to that, and if you keep saying yes to paid work, but it's pulling you away from the life that you actually want, or maybe you say, I'm tired of trading my time for money and still not getting ahead. Or maybe you feel like your podcast feels totally disconnected from your business goals. Well, this episode, I'm changing that for me, and this would be an episode where I would invite you to change that for you as well. So let's jump in and talk about the true cost of saying no and why I turned down this $1,200 gig to build a flywheel and not just another funnel. So the first thing I want to talk about with you is this idea that saying no creates space for the right yes. Every yes comes with a cost, even if that yes is profitable. Like me this last week with saying yes to this $1,200. Yes, that $1,200 would have been great for our family financially. Could have put it away in a rainy day fund, in our emergency fund to get that closer to being fully funded. Could have put that towards, I've got some mechanic work I need done on my car this week. That could have covered almost the whole bill for the mechanic work. It could have covered that. It could have be put into my wife and I's travel fund where we're saving up to maybe go to Europe or something someday. There's many different things that this money could have gone towards, but saying yes to something that's misaligned with my vision or my goals of my business and this podcast robs myself of future momentum. I could have simply pushed back my projects this week. There's no pressing deadline. There's no boss breathing down my neck telling me that my cohort has to launch at the end of the month, that this podcast dashboard that I'm building has to be released by the end of this month. I could easily push those things out, but then I have to think about the cost of what that does to me mentally and how I feel about what I'm trying to accomplish, how I feel when I make agreements with myself, when I sit down and I plan out how I want my month to go, and then I simply set that aside when another quote unquote better opportunity comes up because it pays more in the here and the now. I turned down this $1,200 this last week, not because I could afford to, but because I couldn't afford to keep staying stuck in this cycle of just taking a funnel, basically, of taking this quick payout, but avoiding creating something in the future that's going to pay even more. And another thing that I did this week to help align myself more closely with that is this week, I hit this milestone on my Fiverr account. I've got a Fiverr account where I help podcasters clip up their podcasts into clips for social media for promotion. And I've been able to meet some interesting and fun people that way. But as I was writing this script in this episode, I got a message on there and a notification from somebody who wanted to have me work on their podcast episode. And they had all these questions about adding B-roll, and it was going to be a more involved gig than normal. And I could have easily kind of priced it a little bit higher to make it worth my time. But as I was thinking through this script and thinking about what I just said no to with this other gig, I was like, you know what, I can't afford this month to take on any gigs. And so I went and I blocked out my calendar for Fiverr, and I messaged that individual that I'd been having conversations with, and I said, hey, I'm sorry, this may be ill-timed or inconvenient for you, but I'm not going to be able to fulfill any more orders this month. If maybe next month you would be interested, if you're still around and needing this work in a month, I'd be happy to talk to you then. They were really nice and courteous and cordial, and said thank you for your time. But the cool part is I felt a sense of relief after I sent that message, after I talked to my friends about this other gig and letting them know that, hey, I'm not going to be able to help. I felt this sense of release, and I felt maybe the cost of saying no. I felt the benefit of that flowing into me as energy to be able to actually focus and to understand that I'm committed to this goal for the month of April and the goals that I've set out, and understand that they are worth something and they're worth something to me, and that they're worth saying no to other things to protect right here. So if you feel stuck saying yes to every opportunity just to keep moving, I get it. I've been there. This is the first time I've been able to, I'm just pausing to reflect as I say this, but yeah, I believe it's honest. This is the first time I've been able to actively say no to other opportunities, to say yes to to my own opportunities that I'm trying to generate and create in my own life. And what I want to make for you and to try to convey is that at some point, if you want your podcast to actually support your life and your business, you're going to have to make space for it. You're going to have to learn to say no to some of these other opportunities. Even if you feel stuck right now, that you have to say yes, you're going to have to figure out a way to engineer your life so that you can say no to some of these other things. You don't build something meaningful by cramming it into the margins. You build something meaningful by making space for it and allowing it to grow in to fill that space. As I read through that line in the script here, in the outline, and think about it, it reminds me of my college career and my high school career as well, to be honest, where I would just kind of do enough just to get by. You're not going to create something meaningful and something that's going to impact people's lives by doing enough just to get by cramming it into the margins. You have to figure out how to make it your main thing and how to say no to other things and allow this space to fill and grow into. Sometimes the most strategic move isn't another gig. It's the space to build something that lasts. So don't be afraid to give yourself that space. Don't be afraid to bet on yourself, to bet on your own future, that you can create something, and give yourself space and runway to try to create it. Don't give yourself the end of your energy to try to create that. If your podcasts in your business aren't getting the best energy from you, maybe it's not about your time management. Maybe it's about what you've been saying yes to. If I said yes to this gig for the $1,200 this last month, the person I am and the values that I hold, I would have put their gig ahead of my own stuff, which is fair and right, because I told them that I was going to do that, and I want to do a good job. And so I wouldn't have had energy, creative energy, or time. I may have had time, but I don't believe I would have had creative energy to pour back into this, into the podcast cohort, into the podcast dashboard. And so that's really where I had to say, this isn't the right time for me. I can't help out. And that's always been a challenge for me, especially if I have time on my calendar and I feel like I could fit it in. I feel like I have to then. But for me, the shift this time was understanding that it's not necessarily the time in my calendar. Like, I may be able to squeeze it out and find the time in the calendar. It's my mental and creative ability in my heart to be able to continue to produce this month? Is that already at capacity, even though my calendar says we may be able to find time to make this work? Take that into account. As I'm recording this, it's coming into springtime here in Tennessee, and my wife and I have a hobby of planting and gardening. And this idea of saying no to certain things and creating space for what you actually want reminds me of pruning in the garden. And it takes me back to when my wife and I first started, and we had our first tomato bushes, we had our first blueberry bushes in the yard, we had our first cucumbers climbing up the lattice. And the temptation was to just let these guys grow and let all their abundance just take over the garden. But from the little research that we had done and the reading that we had done, even though it was hard to do, we knew we needed to get out there and cut off some of the shoots on the tomato bushes. We knew we needed to cut off some of the arms on the cucumber vines so that there would be space and there would be energy, mostly energy, because a lot of these plants weren't big enough to need to be pruned, but it's about where there was the plant, helping the plant direct the energy towards the fruit, towards that cucumber that the cucumber vine is growing, towards the tomato that the tomato plant is growing, putting the energy towards actually creating fruit rather than just growing a really cool big bush. And it's the same thing in our lives. When we're saying yes to a lot of things, are we just growing really big in our lives as far as just being busy, or are we actually putting our energy towards the fruit that we're making? So saying no creates space for what you actually want. The second thing I want to talk to you about, and the last thing, is this idea that funnels convert, but flywheels compound. If you've been focusing on quick wins like I was, one-off promotions or one and done content, one and done gigs, it might be why your podcast feels like it's not going anywhere. What you really need is a flywheel, a system that connects your content, your email list, your offers, so that every episode you release builds more trust, builds more traction, and it builds more opportunities for you. It's a subtle difference, but that's usually what separates good ideas from great ideas. And so the key here to realize is that a funnel just kind of lets things kind of filter through. It's one and done. For instance, maybe you are thinking of your podcast as just an episode, and you're just trying to produce this one episode. You're just trying to write it and get it out and get it published. You're just trying to get enough energy to just put it on the slide. This is an analogy I came up with as I was thinking this through. You've put enough energy, if we go back as children to a playground, and you put enough energy in to climb the steps of the ladder, and then you go down the slide. That's kind of how I view a funnel. Whereas a flywheel is this idea where it takes a lot of energy to get it moving. If you had a lot of your friends hanging out with you at the merry-go-round, it took a lot of effort if you were the only person pushing to get that merry-go-round going. But after you got it up to speed and jumped on, it would go for a while, and you wouldn't have to really put a lot of effort into it. That's kind of the difference between a funnel and a flywheel. So this week I realized that every freelance gig I was saying yes to, it was like just climbing that ladder and sliding down one more time. I was going to have to go climb the ladder again and figure out how to slide down it again. It's helpful, sure, but it's not sustainable. Another analogy is it's like tossing a bucket of water into the funnel. It goes down the funnel and it gets to where it needs to go. Like I said, helpful, but it's not sustainable. I have to go get another bucket of water and pour it into this funnel. And so I wanted to build this kind of system where energy builds and it doesn't just drain constantly. And that's where the flywheel, what I'm working on, really comes in now. Going back to the merry-go-round analogy, it takes a lot of effort to get it off the ground and get it moving. But once it's going, it takes a lot less effort. And what I've started with right now looks like a traditional funnel, a lead magnet, a landing page, a welcome sequence, but I'm not stopping there. It's moving past that. It's connecting things. It's not just making one episode and going down that slide one time. It's creating content that links to itself and that is helpful and valuable as a whole, and that continues to be valuable. The more I add to it, the more value there is in this catalog of episodes, because it's not just a funnel. It's not just one episode. It's a collection of information. This season 2, is a documentation of my first 90-day sprint of trying to build this case study of what does it look like to actually monetize and grow my podcast in 90 days. That's what this season 2 is about. And season 3, as of right now, will look similar to that, but with some refinement and tweaking so that you guys can benefit from watching and learning and doing what I do, or avoiding what I do if it's to my detriment. And what I really want is a system that doesn't just convert once, but it continues to compound over time. And that's the mindset shift that I'm making right now, and that you can too. It's as simple as that. We don't have to think about this as a funnel. We can start to pick up this idea of a flywheel and build that in. Funnels are helpful. I'm not here to argue against those. They're focused, they're measurable, but they end. You pour it in at the top and it comes out the bottom. They need to be refilled constantly. A flywheel takes longer to build, but once it's moving, it takes more energy to get it going. But once it's moving, it keeps momentum going, even when you're not pushing it constantly. You don't have to grind near as hard. And that is the principle that I'm after. As part of the podcast dashboard, the podcaster's engine that I'm making and will be releasing soon, is this idea that I'm trying to help prevent burnout in podcasters, trying to create systems to help each podcaster move forward in their podcasting journey, to make it easier to get to that milestone of the 6% club at 100 episodes, because that's really what we have to get to from the research I've done and what I've read to really make this successful. Right now, the data shows you need 100 episodes. So how do we get there? How do we make this sustainable? Because right now it feels like a funnel. We're constantly pouring water in that funnel to try to get it to go. So how do we make this a little bit easier? So if your podcast isn't producing consistent results, it's not because it's not good. I mean, it could be. Definitely take an audit of your content. But if your content is good and you've got your call to action good, you've got your show notes are looking good, or maybe some of that good is good, but not all of it, it's probably because the system around it hasn't been built yet. We have to build this whole thing that works together, that builds this momentum. Start thinking like a flywheel, not just like a funnel. Because this isn't, at the end of the day, guys, about funnels versus flywheels. I'm not here to argue that. It's about building something that gives more, gives you more back, gives back more than it takes. And that starts with choosing the long game. So today I want you to ask yourself, what can I say no to this week that is just filling space so that I can say yes to something that actually builds what I want, that actually builds where I'm trying to go? Write it down, make that decision. And the reason I say write it down, I'm sure you've heard this, but things that get written down are a little more concrete for us in our mind than things that we just have rattling in our mind. So write it down and make that agreement with yourself. Like I talked about earlier in the episode, build that trust in yourself that what you say you're going to do for yourself is going to actually happen. Subtract something small today to create room for something better tomorrow. Start small. It doesn't have to be something big and crazy. It doesn't have to be $1,200. I've been working at this for a long time, and this is a big no that I was able to say. But it didn't start here. It started several years ago when I was learning how to tell people no, to being able to help, be it leading worship at church or something much smaller, that maybe smaller monetarily, but I mean, you get my gist. It wasn't just something that happened overnight for me. It was learning to create small pockets of space to start working in that direction. And what I've learned this week is that saying no isn't about closing doors. It's about protecting the doors that are actually leading us somewhere, that are leading us where we want to go. It's being strategic and understanding where we want to go. I've spent a lot of time chasing opportunities, but I'm realizing that real opportunity is in focus. We have a limited amount of energy, limited amount of time. Be focused like a laser. Figure out what you're trying to build, and in building something that doesn't just hustle for results, but build something that builds momentum over time and that gives you energy back. If you want a podcast that supports your life and your business, then the most powerful question you can ask yourself right now is, what do I need to say no to so that I can finally say yes to what really matters? Add to your life by subtracting. I'm going to be honest with you guys, saying no to this gig last week felt really risky, but it also felt aligned. I alluded to this, that after I got off the phone with my friend from telling them, hey, I appreciate you thinking of me. I appreciate you pitching the idea to me. You did a wonderful job pitching it. You've got a great vision for what you want, but it's just not the right time for me. I felt a sense of release. I felt a sense of energy, and a wave of energy come back over me, because I wasn't trying to figure out how to splice up my energy to make this work this next several weeks, to make this gig come together. So understand what you're trying to get to and try to align yourself to that. Alignment isn't a luxury. It's not something that's going to happen at the end of your journey, or once you've made it, or once you have enough money, you can create alignment in your goals and in your vision. It is actually the foundation and the bedrock of what you're building. If you don't have alignment with what you're trying to build, and you're not actively putting into actions that match what you say you want to build, you're not going to get there. It's not going to happen once you have enough money, once you have enough time, once you have any of this stuff. We don't arrive somewhere and think that we're going to be aligned with where we're trying to align ourselves. My business coach talks about it a lot. He's been posting about it a lot, that this idea that talk is cheap and our actions are what count. So if you're talking about doing something, do your actions line up with that? If they don't, figure out how to align yourself with what you're talking about. So what I've learned this week is that building something that matters doesn't come from hustling harder. It comes from creating space, building systems, and trusting the process enough to stick with it, even when it doesn't necessarily financially make sense. But it's trusting what you're building enough to give it space and time and margins to grow. So if you're ready to shift from hustle to momentum, this is your moment. This is my moment. I'm stepping into it. I'm inviting you to step into it with me. And the call to action today is that if this resonated with you, I want you to go to episode 26. I'm not calling you to do anything else, to join any group, to do anything. I want to continue to give you value and insight into my journey and try to help you have that shift for yourself. Go listen to episode 26. It's where I talk about turning my podcast into a business and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this episode is just the follow through of that. It's the cost, it's the shift. And we're just getting started. I'm so excited, thankful to be on this journey, and I'm thankful that you're here with me going along as well. So until next week, happy podcasting.